So in today's video we are going to be removing the trailing arm and disassembling it because it needs refurbishing like the other side. Now I'm doing a voiceover simply because there's a lot of wind noise in this footage, so it'll make for a better video. So what we'll be doing is we'll be putting new bushes in, we'll be putting new bolts in and stuff like that, and giving it a nice fresh coat of paint, removing all the rust and that sort of thing. And if you're doing this job yourself, this video may come in handy. So for starters, we're going to remove the caliper and the carrier, and then you may notice that the caliper doesn't have any pads in. This is because when I tried moving the car it was seized, so I had to let them off. So I just left them off because I knew I was going to do this job in the future, so that is why this side doesn't have any pads in. So as usual, my arm is in the way, but yeah, so I'm just cracking off some bolts on the caliper sliders. It should be nice and easy because I've already had them off in the past, so yeah. These do tend to seize quite a lot, you know, if they've been sat and doing nothing, but obviously, thankfully, mine weren't. But I'll be replacing them anyway down the line because, yeah, might as well, aren't you? Did it for the other side, we'll do it for this side as well. So the bottom bolt was a bit more of a pain in the backside to remove because the brake hose was in the way. However, I just took the banjo bolt out and moved it out of the way. It's not really much of an issue, to be honest. These brake hoses are getting replaced anyway, so if I do damage them or whatever, and I'm not really too bothered anyway. Because the actual caliper was that rusty, I had to use a hammer to actually smack the end of the hose off. Do bear in mind that these banjo bolts have two copper washers, one on each side of the hose, so I'll make sure that you replace them and put new ones on, and don't forget them, otherwise it will most likely leak. But yeah, now with that out of the way, we can get the bottom bolt cracked off and the caliper can finally be free. And just a few moments later of turning by hand, the caliper is now off, and yeah, we'll just shove it out of the way for the time being so it's not in our way. So as you can see, them sliders are nice and free, which is a brilliant thing. They were filled with copper slip, so to whoever put that in, thank you very much for making my life a little bit easier. So now what we're going to do is remove the two bolts on the back that are bolted into the spindle. So yeah, that should then free off the caliper carrier. I had to get an extension for the bottom one just simply because things been in the way, but yeah, we managed to crack them both off, which is good, and yeah, just loosened them off by hand, and yeah, the caliper carrier just fell off, so brilliant stuff. So there is a caliper carrier in all its rusty glory. It's pretty bad like, but nothing that we can't fix. So yeah, the idea of parts like this, we're just going to basically get all the rust off. I might even try some of that evapor rust. I don't know what it's like, but we'll give it a go. And if it turns out good, then we'll, you know, that's good. So yeah, we'll give that a go, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it will go back to bare metal, so that we can give it a good paint of silver, and yeah, we should be good. I think the calipers will look good in silver. I'm not really too much of a fan of painting them red or that sort of thing. Ideally I want it to look standard, so silver's probably the best option. Next up is removing the disc. This wasn't too bad. I've already had these screws out, but they can be a bit of a nightmare. They do like to seize. They did seize on the other side, so I had to drill them out. But this side, I already had them off, so thankfully, no trouble there. Right then, so the next step is to remove the grease cap, and it is a bit of an awkward job. You do tend to find that the screwdriver does slip off because it's right on the edge. It's not really like a lip that you can grab onto. You kind of have to like hammer it and hope that it kind of comes away a bit from the hub. And once that happens, once that bond breaks, you can get it into the gap and then push it out. And yeah, once it's off, hopefully everything should be nice and clean inside as well. So yeah, as you can see, when it gets to this point where it starts to open up, you can get your screwdriver and put it through one of the holes in the hub, and then just hammer against it, and then it should just pop right off like it did there. So next thing I'm doing is I'm just hammering out that little dent in the nut. That's just there so that it doesn't come undone when driving. But yeah, just hammer that out, and then that should hopefully clear the spindle, and yeah, you can crack the nut off then. So this next bit requires a 32mm socket and a big breaker bar because this is on pretty tight. It's definitely recommended that you do this on the car. If you take your arm off and then do this job, you're going to struggle. So yeah, I do recommend taking it off on the car so that it's less work for you down the line. But yeah, once it's cracked off, then you should be able to just, use the socket to turn it by hand, and then, it should just pop off. So now the nut's off, we can take the hub off, and I like to use a hammer, and what I do with the hammer is I push against the hub, and hopefully it should release. You can probably see on the video that it kind of pushes it out forward ever so slightly, and then once that's done, once it's freed off, you can then pull it off by hand, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the bearing and everything should still all stay intact. It is quite common on these Hondas that the bearing, a part of the bearing, there's like the sleeve, gets stuck onto the spindle, and you have to either, grind it off or drill a slot into it or whatever, and then, use a screwdriver and tap it off. But thankfully this didn't happen with this one. So I didn't want to lose any parts of the hub, so what I did was I got the washer, the nut and the hub, and all the other little bits, and put it into a sealable bag. With it being a bearing, you don't want to get crap in it, so put it in a little bag, sealed up, and hopefully, fingers crossed, nothing should get into it and cause any problems. Right, so next step that I did was I removed the backing plate, gave the bolts a bit of a wire brush just to remove any scale. These are a 10mm, and I used plenty of heat to get these out because I didn't want them snapping in the spindle because it would be an absolute nightmare to get them out. So yeah, we did that. Plenty of heat and a lot of patience. So I fast forwarded to removing the final bolt because it's the same sort of procedure as before, just removing bolts, heating them, etc. So yeah, the backing plate is now off, and as you can see, The spindle is now exposed, and yeah, it's pretty crusty indeed. So yeah, I'll have to give it a bit of a decrust and you know, so we can see what we're working with. But yeah, because of the amount of rust, unfortunately the backing plate was absolutely knackered. You know, it's just completely rotten. So you know, it's just going to be one of them things where, you know, there's no point reusing it because, you know, it'll look crap. But if I do come across some, you know, better condition ones or brand new ones or whatever, I will probably put them on because, you know, I like it to look original. It's a shame that I can't reuse these, but they're just too far gone, unfortunately. Okay, so next up is the ABS sensor, and yeah, as you can see, there's like a little protection bracket type thing on the side of the spindle. That is a bit of a nightmare to get off because I tried doing it on the other side and I just totally gave up and just ripped the thing off by hand. So we'll probably do the same for this side, no doubt. But yeah, as you can see, we've got the ABS cable that runs just below that as well. It's just awkward because the bolts are just that rusty that they just round off, and you can, you know, can't really get them out easy. But fingers crossed, hopefully this side will be a bit better than the other side, and hopefully it'll all come out nice and easy. The bracket isn't that hard to fabricate, so what I'll do is, you know, if I do end up breaking it, just use some 1mm sheet steel, make a little box out of it, and yeah, Bob's your uncle. You've got a new protector for the ABS sensor. So more heating up of bolts again. This is more 10mm bolts. They're all the same on this spindle actually. So yeah, just heating them up, making sure that they don't snap when trying to get them out. And yeah, it should all be nice and easy really. If you apply heat, it's usually a problem when you don't. That's usually when it starts snapping on you. But yeah, this one came out nice and easy along with all the rest of them, which is fantastic. In the end, I just thought, sod it, I'll just snap the ABS sensor off. It's getting replaced anyway, so it doesn't matter, I'm not bothered about it. Then I decided to just get some snips, cut the wire, and then yeah, that's that bit free and off the car. I then did the same for the bracket, just basically wiggled it off until it snapped, and yeah, that's one way of doing it, I suppose. Just a few moments later, I am now removing the remaining bolts on the spindle. It wasn't too much of a hassle getting these out, thankfully. The other side was a lot worse. But yeah, in the end, it didn't snap, so that's a good thing. So now is the time to start removing the drilling arm from the body. So yeah, we're going to start off with removing the lower control arm bolts. There's one that's mounted to the rear cross member, and yeah, it's very rusty, as you can probably see. There's a thread, and yeah, it's just, you know, but we did manage to crack it off. I used a lot of heat on the thread and just loosened it off so that, you know, when we come to remove it, it's a lot easier. And then we've also got the one at the bottom of the trailing arm, which is probably the worst. As you can see, the thread is absolutely covered in rust, so that'll be fun to remove. But yeah, we'll give it a shot and hopefully it won't snap unlike the other side. So this bolt was probably the most worrying, simply because the other side, when I did the other side, it completely snapped. It was completely seized in the bush. So this time I made sure to apply tons of heat to the thread, just so it can help, you know, release some of that rust that's, you know, stuck in the thread there. But yeah, so I just left it on heat for a couple of minutes just to free it up. It did start smoking. I think there was some underseal on the actual trailing arm itself, but yeah. So what I did was I had to, in fact I even had to get a 12mm socket on there. It was a 13, but it was that rusty that it rounded off to a 12, so I had to hammer a 12 on, and then start to undoing it. So yeah, and it would not budge. It really would not budge. It was stuck on good and proper, which was very annoying. So yeah, in the end, unfortunately, the plastic protector did get damaged as well from the heat. I did try and not get it, you know, ruined, but it's one of the things. That bolt there was seized as well. It didn't want to come off, and to be quite honest with you, it doesn't really matter. Them protectors, you can get them off Rover 45s, MGZSs, and other Honda Civics as well. So you know, they're still quite plentiful. If I ever want to actually put another one on, which I probably will do if I can find it. But yeah, other than that, I think the main priority was getting that rusty bolt out, which was holding the low control arm on. So in the end, I went to go get some other sockets from the shed and a big breaker bar, because I just wasn't going to do it with leverage on the smaller breaker bar that I had. So yeah, we got the big breaker bar and the 12mm socket to go onto it, hammered it on, and tried to basically persuade it to start moving. In the end, I was very surprised it actually did start to actually move. I would have thought, oh, it's turning, but then, you know, obviously it snaps. But no, it actually turned. The thread started turning on the other side, which is brilliant. So what I did was kept on moving it backwards and forwards, tightening, loosening to free up the threads from the rust, so that we wouldn't cause it to, you know, snap or anything like that. So yeah. What was quite annoying though was the fact that the breaker bar was that long. It kept on hitting the ground when trying to turn it. So yeah, it kept on hitting the top of the wheel arch and the ground, and yeah, so that was a bit of a nightmare. I didn't really fancy having to lift the car up because the wheels were all off and stuff, and yeah, it was in a position where it was stable. So yeah, but other than that, short turns eventually got there in the end, so there we go. So a new camera angle, just so you can see what we're doing here. And yeah, I managed to get it slack enough so that I can use the smaller bar, and just kept on applying more heat to the bolt, just, you know, to help it come out. But yeah, we eventually got there in the end, until it did start to get stuck. The reason being was because once it had passed through the threads, the lower control arm dropped slightly, and it gripped onto the bolt so that it wouldn't want to pull out. So the idea was to just get the jack up the low control arm to free the bolt from that, and then basically you could just pull it out. So yeah, there we go. That is the rusty bolt out. I will be replacing these with some brand new bolts that I got from Discount MG Rover Spares. They came in very handy, as nowhere else did them. So cheers to those guys. Okay, so the next step is this compensator arm bolt, which bolts into the body of the car. Now, a lot of people have had trouble with this bolt in the past. A lot of people have had to drill holes into the little box section it is in, because the bolt seizes into the bush or into the thread or whatever, and it doesn't want to come out basically. So yeah, it can be a really big issue for some, but luckily this came off really easily for some reason. Same for the other side. I don't know if it was just me getting lucky, probably is, but I tell you what, it did save me a heck of a lot of time. If you know, if it did go wrong, I would be there for a lot longer, believe me. Okay, so for the next two bolts to be removed, they are for the trailing arm bush. So these were going to be tight. I just knew it. So what I did was I just used my foot and pushed against them, and they did slowly loosen off, which is good. The second one I did by hand because it wasn't as tight, but yeah, they came out pretty nicely without any use of heat really, so that's pretty good. Luckily they didn't snap, but yeah, there we go. So now we're just loosening off the trailing arm bushing bolts, and as you can see it is starting to lower down. So what I decided to do was to get the jack underneath the trailing arm just to support it so it doesn't, you know, fall down. But it shouldn't really, because it's still hooked up to the upper control arm. But yeah, just to give it some extra support. But there we go. Yeah, so just a few more remaining bolts to remove and we should be good. Now for the upper control arm. This bolt is another 13mm and it was actually surprisingly easy to remove as well. Yet again, people have had problems removing this one, have had to cut the arm and stuff, but this came out really nice and easy. It even had a coating of copper slip-on, so I assume it's been off in the past, which is, you know, interesting, but there we go. So, just finishing off the bolt, undoing it by hand, and that should be it. The trailing arm should be free. It is still attached to the handbrake cable and also the brake cable, but we will sort that out after, you know, removing it. What I'll do is I will lower it down, put it onto the jack so that it's stable on something, and try to work out how I'm going to remove them rusty bolts as well. So a bit of a jump cut here, but you ain't missing much, don't worry. I just basically snipped the hose in the end because the bolts that were holding the bracket on, as you can see there, they were rounded off, and also the bolt that was holding the hose on was also rounded off. So yeah, and every time I tried to remove said brake hose, it just bent the bracket, and I didn't really want to damage it, so yeah, I just left it off and just snipped it. Next up was to also remove the handbrake cable. So I just got the angle grinder out and just cut that thing off as well, because that was, yet again, that was seized. So here we are, finally all removed, and yeah, there we go. So the rest of the stuff can be done off the car, you know, like with bushes, the bolts that are proving themselves to be difficult, all that can be sorted off the car, where I've got a bit more, you know, working area. But yeah, it's good that I don't have to remove any snapped bolts from the trailing arm and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's been good. All I need to do now is, as I say, remove the other bolt for the compensator arm, and yeah, everything should be off then, which is good. So there we go. Cheers for watching the video on the disassembly of the trailing arm. There will be some more videos coming out later on, where we'll be removing the bushes and refurbishing the control arms, and yeah, we'll get the trailing arm eventually painted, all new bolts put in, so yeah, it should be good. Hopefully this helped if you may be in a similar situation, trying to, you know, refurbish your trailing arms on your Honda. They're all pretty similar, these 90s Hondas, so it should give you an insight on what to do. But there we go. Thank you ever so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.